The candle was the mistake. Verity Lambourne knew it the instant the latch clicked behind her. Knew it the way you know a stitch has slipped, a full second before the scene gives. Too late to stop, just early enough to feel it coming. She had been 3 weeks in this house, and 3 weeks careful. And tonight, with her fingers cramped from cold and the page in front of her swimming, she had let the flame burn a finger's width higher than caution allowed. And now the library door was open, and a man stood in it, and the light she should not have lit was painting her guilt across the whole length of the Stratton House shelves. "Don't move," he said. She did not move. She had a book open against the cool leather of the reading desk, her thumb still pressing flat a page that whispered under it, and a borrowed shawl of rough wool slipping off one shoulder, and ink. She could feel it, cool and damning, drying tight on the side of her right hand. The room smelled, as it always did, of beeswax and old paper, and the cold ghost of candle smoke. A lady's companion did not have ink on her hands at midnight. A lady's companion was asleep, 2 floors up in a narrow bed, having turned down her mistress's coverlet, and banked her mistress's fire, and said her mistress's good nights. She was not here, in the Duke of Stratton's private library, reading a translation of Epictetus that cost more than she would earn in a year. He came forward into the candlelight, his bare feet making no sound on the cold stone of the threshold, and then none at all on the carpet. And Verity made herself look at him, because looking away was what a guilty woman did, and she had decided long ago. He was younger than a duke had any business being, 27 perhaps, no more, and built like a man who rode hard and often, broad through the shoulder in a way his shirt sleeves could not disguise, for he had come down without a coat. Dark hair, disordered from a pillow he had clearly left, a jaw that had not been near a razor since morning, and eyes that went, not to her face, not to the shawl, not to the ink, but to the book. To the book, and then to the shelf, and then, she watched him do it, to the precise gap in the shelf where the book had been. "That volume," he said, "lives on the 3rd shelf, 2nd from the window, spine out, with the Marcus Aurelius to its left and the Seneca to its right." He had a low voice, unhurried, exact. "You have left a gap a half-inch too wide. You took the Seneca down as well." It was not the question she had braced for. She had braced for thief. She had braced for guards, for her mistress Woken, for the long, cold carriage ride at dawn with her trunk and her character in ruins. She had not braced for a man who, finding a stranger in his library at midnight, looked first at his shelving. "I put it back," she said. "You put it back 2 volumes to the left." "I put it back," Verity repeated, and to her horror, her voice did not shake, which meant the shaking had gone somewhere worse, somewhere inside. "In better order than your footman keeps it. Your Seneca is shelved by title, and your Cicero by date, and your Greek is shelved, my lord, by nothing I have yet been able to determine, which suggests it was arranged by a person who does not read it." The silence after that was a different shape than the silence before it. She heard her own words land and wished, briefly and uselessly, that she had let him call the guards instead. There was a kind of woman who could say such a thing to a duke and survive it, and that woman had £10,000 and a name that opened doors, and Verity Lambourne had neither. She had a lost scholar's daughter's vocabulary, and a borrowed shawl, and £4 sewn into the hem of a petticoat, against the day she would need to run. The Duke set the branch of candles he carried on the long table. The brass base met the wood with a small, cool click. He did it carefully, squaring its base to the table's edge, and the small, precise gesture told her more than his face did. Then he crossed to the 3rd shelf, 2nd from the window, his shadow sliding huge across the leather spines, and with 2 fingers he drew out the Greek Cicero. She heard the faint creak of it leaving the row, and looked at it as though it had personally disappointed him. "By nothing you have been able to determine," he said. "There is no system in it. The Latin is alphabetical, the English is by date of acquisition. I can see your book plates, they are dated. The Greek is neither. It is not by author, it is not by title, it is not by size, it is not by date. It is the only run of shelf in this entire room that has been shelved by a hand that did not care where things went. She should stop. She knew she should stop. Which means, she finished, because apparently she was a person who could not stop, that you read everything in here except the Greek. And a man does not keep a wall of Greek he cannot read, unless someone he loved could. She watched that go in. She watched it find something. For a moment, the Duke of Stratton simply stood there with his uncle's Greek in his hand. For it had to be an uncle, or a father, some man now gone who had filled this wall and could no longer keep it in order. And the candle flame leaned and threw both their shadows up the spines of 10,000 books, the gilt titles catching and going dark again, and the great clock in the hall began, very far away, to strike midnight. 12 slow strokes muffled through stone and oak, and neither of them counted them aloud, but Verity felt every one. "What is your name?" he said. Not a question, a man requiring a fact. "Verity Lambourne. I am companion to Lady Pembroke." She lifted her chin. "Your aunt, my lord, which I imagine makes this worse." "It makes it," he said, "more interesting." He turned the Greek over once in his hand and slid it home. Third shelf, second from the window, exactly where it lived. 3 weeks, he said. Someone has been in this room 3 weeks. A book left warm by the lamp. A candle end I did not burn. Cyrus the footman swore the door was locked each night, and he was not lying, because Cyrus has not the imagination to lie. I assumed a maid. I assumed pilfering. I sat up tonight to catch a thief. He looked at her, and for the first time something moved at the corner of his mouth that was not quite a smile, and was certainly not anger. I have caught a critic instead. "You may still call the guards," Verity said. "I should rather you decided now than at dawn." "Sit down, Miss Lambourne." "My lord, you have read 3 weeks of my books standing up by a single candle, ruining your eyes, when there are 6 chairs in this room and a lamp that gives 20 times the light." He drew out the chair at the reading desk, the good chair, the one with arms, and stood behind it like a man at a dinner party who has decided where a lady will be seated. "Sit down, and tell me what is wrong with the way my uncle shelved his Greek. I have been meaning to put it right for 2 years, and I did not know where to begin." She should have run. The £4 in her hem were for exactly this. For the moment a thing went wrong in a great house, and a girl without a name had to be gone before the questions started. But the lamp, when he lit it, breathed out a thread of oil smoke, and then threw a warm, broad circle across the desk, the chill of the room drawing back from it. And in that circle the page of Epictetus she had abandoned lay open at the line she had been reading when the door opened. The line she had read 4 times, because she could not get past it. And she was so tired, and the chair had arms, and the Duke was waiting. Verity sat down. That was the first night. She told herself, climbing the back stair at 1 in the morning with her slippers in her hand, the cold treads gritty and faintly creaking under her stocking feet, that it would also be the last. She told herself this with great firmness, and she did not believe a word of it, because she had already seen the way the gap on the 3rd shelf would look when the Greek was set right. And a person who has seen how a thing ought to be cannot easily stop her hands from reaching toward it. To understand why a sensible woman of 25 would risk her livelihood, her character, and her last £4 for a wall of books, you must understand what Verity Lambourne had been before she was a companion, which was a scholar's daughter. Which is to say, a person raised inside the largest house in England, the house of everything that had ever been written down, and then turned out of it without a penny when the man who had built it was gone. Her father had been Edmund Lambourne, and once, in the small world that cared about such things, that name had meant something. He had translated Greek, not for money, there was never money, but because, he used to say, a sentence written 2,000 years ago by a slave who became a teacher was worth more than a year of a living man's flattery, and somebody had to carry it across the water into English without drowning it. He had taught her letters in 2 alphabets at once. By 7, she could read Xenophon. By 12, she was correcting his fair copies, finding the place where a tired man's pen had skipped a line, and he had laughed and called her his second pair of eyes, and never once told her that a girl had no use for Greek. He had been the only man she ever met who did not seem to know it. And then there had been the winter of the long cold, 3 years gone now, and the fever that went through their lodgings and through half the lane, and her father had been past 60 and not strong, and one grey morning, the breath simply went out of him between one sentence and the next. He had been dictating, she had been writing, and the pen had waited and waited, and there had been nothing more to write. She had buried the cost of that morning so deep that she could pass whole weeks without touching it. But it surfaced, sometimes, when a page waited under her hand for the next word. He had left her 3 things: a trunk of books, which she had sold, one by one, to eat, a name that meant nothing to anyone who could pay her wages, and a wrong she had not yet found a way to right. For the great work of his life, the translation he had laboured over for 11 years, the one that should have made his name and fed his daughter, had been published the spring after he was gone, under another man's name entirely. But that is the middle of the story, and she did not yet know that the means of writing it stood on the 3rd shelf of the Duke of Stratton's library, second from the window, in a binding too fine for the theft inside it. Lady Pembroke had taken her on out of a kind of brisk charity that pretended to be self-interest. "I require a companion who can read aloud without putting me to sleep," the old woman had announced at the agency, peering at Verity through a lorgnette, "and who will not weep when I am cross, which is often. You have a sensible face. Can you do accounts?" Verity could do accounts. Verity could do a great many things. Order a household, settle a tradesman, write a letter in a hand fine enough to be mistaken for an engraving, dose a cold, mend a flounce, and read 4 languages. And Lady Pembroke had use for all of them, and paid for none of them at their worth, because that is what a companion is: a gentlewoman's whole competence, purchased at a servant's price, on the understanding that she be grateful for the chair by the fire. Verity was grateful for the chair by the fire. She was also, every single night, quietly furious, and the library was where she put the fury so that it would not come out somewhere it could be seen. For Lady Pembroke had a nephew, and the nephew was a duke, and when her own townhouse had its roof open to the sky for repairs that spring, the duke had, with a stiff, dutiful courtesy that Verity had observed from the edges of rooms, installed his aunt and her companion in the east wing of Stratton House for the whole of the season, which was how a penniless scholar's daughter came to be sleeping 2 floors above the finest private library in London, with a key to nothing and a hunger for everything. She had found the library on her 2nd night, looking for a book to read her mistress to sleep. She had found it unlocked, that once, and she had stood in the doorway with her candle, the smell of leather and beeswax rolling out warm to meet her, and felt something in her chest come undone that had been laced tight for 3 years. And she had been back every night since, after the house slept, having learned which board on the back stair sang under a heel, and which of the long windows had an iron catch that did not catch. She had not, until tonight, been caught. Now she sat at the reading desk of the Duke of Stratton, Theodore Carrick, she would learn his name was, though no one used it, pulled the entire run of his late uncle's Greek off the 3rd shelf and stacked it on the table between them, and asked her, like a man consulting an engineer about a bridge, how it ought to be put back. "By author," she said. "Then within each author by work, and within each work, if you have more than one edition, and you do, you have 3 platters, by date of edition, earliest to latest, so the eye travels left to right through time." She touched the stack. The topmost cover was cold and smooth as a stone under her fingertips. "May I?" He nodded. She began to sort, her hands moving quick and sure, the cold forgotten. "Your uncle did read these. Look, the spines are cracked at the same places, here and here. The leather gone soft and pale where a thumb had opened them 1,000 times. The passages a man returns to." He simply shelved by where his hand last set the book down, which is the most human system in the world, and the most useless for finding anything. "You can tell that he read them," the Duke said, "from the cracks in the spines." "I can tell a great many things from books, my lord. It is nearly the only thing I am good for." She did not look up. "You, for instance, read late, and you read in this chair, because the right arm of it is worn pale, and the left is not, which means you hold the book in your left hand and turn the pages with your right, which means you are left-handed, and have trained yourself out of it for the world, but not for your own library." Now she did look up, and caught him with his guard entirely down, and felt a small, unworthy flare of triumph. "I am right." "You are appalling," said the Duke of Stratton, with what she would later understand was the highest praise he knew how to give, and pulled out the chair across from her, its legs grating once on the boards, and sat, and reached for the nearest plater, the calf cover cooled in his broad hand. "Show me the system. I will not have you doing it alone. It is my wall." They worked until the window went from black to grey, the candles burning down to stubs of warm tallow, and the fire settling to a low red hush in the grate. That should have been the end of it, and it was the beginning. She told herself, the second night, that she went only to finish the Greek. There were 11 shelves, and they had done one. It would have been a kind of cruelty to leave a man with his books in stacks on the floor. She told herself the third night that she went to keep her word, because she had said she would do the Stoics, and she had not yet done the Stoics. By the fourth night, she had stopped telling herself anything, because the Duke was already in the chair when she came down, the warm smell of chocolate reaching her at the door, 2 lamps lit, and a pot of it gone cold and skinned over beside him, and a book held open in his left hand, and he looked up at her over it and said, "You are late. Lady Pembroke kept you." And it was so exactly true, and so exactly kind, that she had to turn and pretend to study a shelf until her face was her own again. He was, she discovered, the most precise man she had ever met, and she had been raised by a man who once spent a fortnight on the placement of a single comma. The Duke's estate ran, she gathered, like a clock he had built himself. His accounts balanced to the farthing, his correspondence answered the day it came, his stables, his tenants, his 3 estates, and his seat in the Lords, all moving through their seasons in an order he had personally arranged and personally maintained. He told her these things not to boast. He had not the smallest vanity, which was itself disarming, but the way another man might mention the weather, as the simple medium he moved through. He liked things to be in their places. He liked to know where a thing was before he reached for it. And the one room in all his orderly world that he could not bring to order was this one, his uncle's room, the Greek wall, because the man who could have taught him the system was gone, and the Duke would sooner have left it in chaos for the rest of his life than admit to anyone living that he could not read the language his uncle had loved. He admitted it to her on the 6th night, very low, not looking at her, his thumb moving back and forth on the worn, smooth arm of the chair, the only sound in the room besides the fire's small settling and tick. "I have 11 shelves of books," he said, "that my uncle would have given his right hand for me to read, and I cannot read one line of them. I had tutors, I had Oxford. I have a memory that loses nothing and a head for figures that has never failed me. And I sat in this room as a boy, with the alphabet in front of me, and the letters would not hold. They slid, they reversed. The beta and the theta would change places when I looked away and back. My tutor said I was idle. My uncle never said anything at all, which was worse. And then he was gone, and the not saying became the only thing he ever gave me about it." He turned the cold chocolate cup a precise quarter turn on its saucer. The porcelain rang faintly against the glaze. "I have never told a living soul that. I cannot think why I have told you, except that you have ink on your hand and 4 languages in your head, and you talk to my books as though they can hear you. And it seemed possible." Verity sat very still. Outside, an early cart went by on the cobbles, the first of the morning. Give me your hand, she said. He looked at her. Not that. Give me your hand, palm up. I'm going to show you something my father showed me. He laid his hand on the table, that broad left hand, palm up, the skin warm and faintly calloused along the base of the fingers, and she took a pen and, without ink, traced a letter on it, slow, the dry nib dragging just enough to be felt. The same letter 3 times, so that the muscle, and not only the eye, would learn the shape. He could not abide a sloppy alpha, she said, tracing. He said the eye lies, but the hand remembers. The letters do not slide for the hand. Watch. Beta. She drew it on his palm. It has a belly and a spine, like a man sitting up straight. Theta, she drew it, is a closed door with a bar across. They cannot change places because they are different rooms. You have been trying to read them with your eyes, which lie to you. We will teach your hand, and your hand has never lost a figure in its life. The Duke looked at his own palm, where her invisible letters were, and then at her. And there was something in his face she had no name for, and did not let herself examine, because it was 3 a.m, and she was a companion, and he was a duke, and the only sane thing to do with a feeling like that was to leave it on the table and go up the back stair to her narrow bed. She left it on the table. She went up the back stair, the rough wool of the borrowed shawl drawn close against the draught that breathed down the stairwell. She lay awake under a thin, cold coverlet until the maid stirred, and on her own palm, in the dark, she traced a beta and a theta, over and over, a closed door and a man sitting up straight, and called herself 10 kinds of fool, and could not stop. There was a cat in the library. She had not mentioned the cat to anyone, because the cat was a secret of the kind that great houses are full of, the small, unofficial residence the household pretends not to see. He was old and grey, and blind in one eye, his fur soft and dusty as a neglected muff, and he lived behind the philosophy on the bottom shelf, and the Duke called him Diogenes because, he said, the creature had spent his whole life looking for one honest mouse, and had clearly given up. Diogenes had taken against Verity on the first night, and revised his position on the 4th, when she proved willing to share the warm spot by the fire, the heat of the grate soaking into the hearthrug, and by the 7th, he had appointed himself the official supervisor of the reshelving, which he performed by sitting on whichever volume she next required, and declining, with the immense moral authority of the very old, to be moved. He is on the Aristophanes, Verity reported on the 7th night, hands on her hips. He is always on the Aristophanes. The Duke did not look up from his page. He was sounding out a line of Xenophon with his finger and his moving lips, slow and absorbed, the whisper of the syllables and the rasp of the turning leaf the only sounds in the room. He has views on comedy. Leave him. We will do the Aristophanes when he tires of having opinions, which, in my experience, is never. My lord, I cannot file around a cat. You filed around a duke for 9 nights and made him learn his alphabet. A cat is a smaller obstacle. Now he did look up, and there was the not-quite smile. Bribe him. There is cold ham in the dish by the door. I had Cyrus leave it. I am told it is the universal solvent of feline principle. It was. Diogenes sold his moral authority for 3 shillings worth of ham, the salt smell of it pulling him off the shelf with a soft thud onto the carpet, and retired to the hearthrug to wash, the small, wet rhythm of his tongue mixing with the fire. And Verity got her Aristophanes, and somewhere in the small absurdity of it, the Duke of 3 estates negotiating with a one-eyed cat over a shelf of Greek comedy at 1:30 in the morning, she felt the last of her caution let go its grip, which was precisely the thing she could least afford, and the thing she was now entirely unable to prevent. They had fallen, by then, into the shape of it. He came down first and lit the lamps. She came down after the house slept. They worked the wall an hour, 2, 3, and then the work would slip, the way work does between 2 people who would rather be talking, into something else. An argument about a word, a passage read aloud, a memory let out into the dark, because the dark made it possible. She learned that he had been 19 when his uncle's death made him a duke, that he had taken a county's worth of debt and disorder and spent 8 years turning it into the clockwork he now mentioned like the weather, that he had done it alone, friendless, distrusting flattery so completely that he had armored himself against affection along with it, and had not noticed, until lately, that the armor did not come off at night. "You will think me absurd," he said on the 8th night. No, she corrected herself, even as she thought it. The 8th. Her father's voice in her head. The eye lies, but the hand remembers. But I had begun to believe that I simply did not have the apparatus for this, for the thing other men seem to find without trying. I have a head for figures, and a memory that loses nothing, and an estate that runs to the farthing. And I had concluded, quite calmly, that some men are built for the ledger and not the... He gestured, a precise man at the absolute edge of his vocabulary. The rest of it. And that I was one of them. It was not even a grief. It was a fact I had filed. And now? She should not have asked. She asked. "And now," said the Duke of Stratton, looking at her across the lamp. "I find I had simply shelved the book in the wrong place, by a hand that did not know where things went, and could not find it for 8 years, and assumed it was not in the room." He turned a page he was not reading. It was in the room the entire time. Verity looked very hard at the spine of a Thucydides, and did not trust herself to answer. It was the wager that nearly undid them, later that same 8th night. They had taken to wagering over translations. He would read a line aloud in his slow new Greek, and she would render it into English. And if her English was finer than the printed English on the facing page, which it generally was, the printed English being Farrar's, though she did not yet know that, did not yet let herself look at the facing pages. She won. And if it was not, he won. And the stakes were never anything, because two people who have nothing to give each other but their company will wager the only coin they have, which is forfeits, foolish ones, the currency of people falling in love who have not said so. "A line of your own," she said, when she had won 3 running. "That is the forfeit. Not a line of Xenophon's. A line of Theodore Carrick's, composed on the spot, in English, on a subject of my choosing. And it must be true. I do not compose. You compose accounts. You compose strategy. You composed an entire campaign against a baronet in your head before you had finished your soup. You can compose me one true sentence." She propped her chin on her hand. The lamp threw its warm circle. She could feel the faint heat of it on her cheek. The cat snored. Somewhere a board cooled and ticked. Subject. The thing you most want and have not got. She had meant it lightly. She watched it stop being light. He set down the Xenophon, the cover meeting the wood with a soft slap, and squared it to the table's edge, and was quiet for so long that she could hear the candle gutter and the fire breathe, and she nearly took it back. And then he said, not looking at her, in the exact unhurried voice he used for facts, "I want to be in a room where the person reading does not stop when I come in." And then, because a precise man finishes his accounting even when it ruins him, "I have been in a great many rooms, Miss Lambourne. People stop when I come in. They stand, and they arrange their faces, and they wait to discover what the Duke requires. You did not stop. The first night, with the candle, caught in my own library, you told me my Greek was shelved by a fool, and went on reading. No one has gone on reading in front of me since I was 19 years old." He looked up. "There. That is your forfeit. It is true, and I find I cannot take it back," which I believe was the design. The clock had not struck. For once, she wished it would, wished for any sound to break the thing stretching between them across the warm circle of the lamp. Because there were 2 ways the next minute could go, and only one of them was survivable, and she could feel them both, the way she felt a slipped stitch before the seam gave. She chose the survivable one. She always did. It was the discipline of 3 years. It was the 4 pounds in her hem made into a habit of the heart. "You have won the wager," she said, lightly, picking up the next volume with hands that were not quite steady. "For that was finer English than any on the facing page, and I concede the round. Diogenes is on the Plato. Bribe your cat, my lord. We have 4 shelves yet before the window goes grey." And he let her. That was the thing she would remember, in the cold days that came after, when she was building the worst reading of his silence. That on the night she chose the safe door, he let her choose it, and did not press, and bribed his cat, and read her 4 shelves of Plato in his slow, triumphant Greek until the black window went grey. Because he was a precise man, and precise men who are also good do not force a door before its owner is ready, even when their whole, unaccountable heart is on the wrong side of it. That was the high place. She did not know it was the high place. One never does. She knew only that she went up the back stair as the birds started, light as water, and that the next night was the night they came to the 3rd shelf, second from the window, and everything she had let herself stop guarding came due all at once. The trouble, and there was always going to be trouble, she had known that since the candle, began with the 3rd shelf, second from the window. They came to it on the 9th night. They had worked their way along the wall, author by author, and the Duke had begun, slowly, haltingly, with his hand more than his eyes, to sound out the titles as they shelved. Not reading, not yet, but recognizing, the way you recognize a face before you can name it. And Verity had felt each small recognition like a coin dropping into a box she had thought was empty for good. He was quick. Of course he was quick. He had a memory that lost nothing. He had only ever needed the door in by the right hand, and she had been so absorbed in the pleasure of teaching, the oldest and purest pleasure she knew, that she reached up to the 3rd shelf and drew out the next volume without looking, and had it open on the desk before her eye caught the title page, the page cold and faintly slick under her fingers. And then the room went strange and tilted, and the small hiss of the lamp flame seemed very loud. It was a translation, from the Greek, of the Discourses. Epictetus, the same author whose stolen, borrowed lines she had been reading the night the door opened. A fine octavo, calf-bound, gilt, the leather smooth and unworn under her thumb, the kind of book her father had never been able to afford to be printed in. And on the title page, beneath the Greek title and the English one, in a clean, engraved hand, still sharp with fresh ink, was the name of the translator, Sir Hugh Ferrer. And beneath that, the year, the spring after her father was gone. Verity did not make a sound. She had spent 3 years learning not to make a sound about this. But her hands, those hands that her father had trained to be steady, betrayed her, and the page trembled, and the Duke, who lost nothing, who noticed everything, who had spent 9 nights learning to read her the way she read his books, went still across the table. "Miss Lambourne." "It is nothing, the light." She turned the page, fast, as though she might leave the name behind. And there was the dedication, and the preface in Ferrer's smooth, false voice. "I undertook this labor across 11 years. 11 years. The thief had even taken the count of years. 11 years was her father's, exactly her father's. And a sound did come out of her then, small and terrible. And she put the book down and put both hands flat on the cool wood of the table and breathed in the smell of old paper until the room held still. "You will tell me," the Duke said. Not a command. A door held open. So she told him. She had never told anyone. She told him about Edmund Lambourne, and the 11 years, and the fever, and the morning the pen waited. And she told him about the spring after, when she had walked into a bookseller's on the Strand to sell the last of her father's library, and seen, in the window, her father's life, his exact words, his exact 11 years, bound in calf she could not afford, under the name of a man who had visited their lodgings precisely twice. Twice. Both times to consult her father, both times leaving with a portfolio of pages to study. A celebrated amateur, a baronet, a man who dined at the tables that mattered, and who had needed only one late scholar's manuscript to become, overnight, the foremost classicist in England. "I could prove nothing," she said. Her voice had gone flat and even, the voice she used for accounts. "A scholar's manuscript is the scholar's word against the world's. And the scholar was gone, and his word was a girl of 22, with ink on her hands and no money for a lawyer. Sir Hugh Ferrer has the original pages, in my father's hand, locked away where they cannot be found, because they are the only thing that could undo him. He is feted. He is consulted. He dines at—" She stopped. "Sir Hugh Ferrer," he said, "dines at this table on Thursday. My aunt invited him a month ago. He is to give us his views on the new Sophocles after dinner, in this room, to 20 people. And I had thought it a tedious evening, and now I find it may be otherwise." He closed the book. He set it down, squared to the table's edge, precise. "Tell me, Miss Lambourne, the original pages, in your father's hand. Would you know them, beyond any doubt? If you saw them again, could you swear to the hand?" "I would know my father's hand," Verity said, "in the dark, by touch. I corrected 11 years of it." "Good," said the Duke of Stratton. And for the first time since she had met him, he smiled all the way, and it changed his whole grave face into something younger and more dangerous. "Then we have until Thursday." She should have said no. She knew, even then, sitting in the warm circle of the lamp with the thief's book between them, that she should have gathered her shawl and her £4 and her dignity, and said, "My lord, this is not a thing for a duke to meddle in. You will create a scandal, you will be talked of. A man of your name does not go to war with a baronet over a companion's grievance, and I would not have you do it." She knew that whatever was happening across that table, the late hours, the traced letters, the way he said, "You are late, Lady Pembroke, kept you," was the kind of thing that, once it touched the open air of a London season, became a story other people owned and ruined. She said none of it. She was so tired of being the only person who knew. She had carried her father's wrong alone for 3 years, the way she carried everything alone, and a man with a memory that lost nothing had just looked at the proof of it and gone cold and steady on her behalf, and the relief of it was so enormous that it drowned her sense entirely. "Until Thursday," she said. And so they began to plan, in the orderly mind of the most precise man in England, the unmaking of Sir Hugh Ferrer. And Verity Lambourne, who had spent 3 years being careful, stopped being careful at exactly the wrong moment, in exactly the wrong house, where there were 20 bedrooms full of the kind of people who counted other people's candles. The plan, when the Duke laid it out, was a thing of beautiful and terrible simplicity, and it depended on a single fact, that a man who has stolen another man's life's work cannot bear to be parted from the evidence, and so keeps it close. Ferrer had the original pages. He would not have destroyed them. A thief who destroys his proof has nothing to threaten the world with, should the world ever doubt him, and besides, a man like Ferrer would love them, the way he loved everything that made him more than he was. He kept them. The question was only where, and whether they might be made to surface. "You will not steal them," Verity said. "Whatever else, I will not have you turned thief for me. There has been enough taking in this story." "I do not steal," said the Duke, mildly offended. "I am a duke. I require things and they appear. It is quite different." But he had agreed. No theft. Instead, something better. On Thursday, before 20 witnesses, the Duke of Stratton would ask Sir Hugh Ferrer, the foremost classicist in England, a question about his own translation that only the true translator could answer. A question Verity would write. A question that turned on a single choice her father had made. A choice no thief could reproduce, because no thief understood it. And when Ferrer fumbled it, the Duke would press, gently, precisely, the way he pressed a tenant who had underreported his acres, until the whole smooth edifice of the man cracked along the seam. "It will not be enough to ruin him," Verity warned. A fumbled question is not proof. He will laugh it off. The clever ones always do. It will not ruin him, the Duke agreed. It will frighten him. A frightened thief moves his treasure, and I will know when he moves it, because I will have asked him that same evening, in front of those same 20 people, to lend his precious original manuscript to the British Institution for an exhibition of English scholarship that I am, as of tomorrow morning, endowing. He cannot refuse a duke's request before 20 witnesses without explaining why his original pages cannot be seen. And he cannot show them, because the hand in them is your father's, and somewhere on them, you will tell me, there is a thing only your father would have written. There was a thing only her father would have written. On the manuscript of the Discourses, in the margin beside the famous passage about what is and is not in our power, Edmund Lambourne had written, in Greek, a small private joke for his daughter. A line that was not in any text, a line he had made up, mock solemn, the spring she turned 15 and declared she would never marry because husbands were less interesting than verbs. Of marriage and of Greek grammar, he had written in the margin in his beautiful hand, only the irregular forms are worth the trouble. It was nonsense. It was the most precious nonsense in the world. It was on the manuscript, and it was in her memory, and it was nowhere else on the earth, and no thief who did not know it would dare exhibit a page that bore an untranslatable private joke he could not account for. He will have to choose, the Duke said softly, the firelight steady on the cold planes of his face, between refusing a duke and exposing a forger. And I will give him no third door. That is the whole of strategy, Miss Lambourne. Leave a man one door, and make certain it opens onto the room you have chosen. Verity looked at him across the lamp and thought, I'm going to remember this man for the rest of my life. She did not yet understand how true that was, or how much it would cost. They had 3 nights to prepare the question, and they used them, and somewhere in those 3 nights, the thing that had been gathering between them since the first one stopped pretending to be about books. It was the wrist that did it. Such things are always small. On the second of the 3 nights, she leaned across him to point at a line of Greek. He was reading now, genuinely reading, slow and triumphant, his finger following the words across the rough-edged page. And the worn cuff of her sleeve fell back, and he saw the £4. Not the coins, the hem. She had unpicked and re-sewn the hem of that petticoat so many times that the thread had worn a pale line across the cuff of the sleeve she rolled back to sew it, a faint, repeated crease. And the Duke, who lost nothing, looked at that crease, and then, slowly, at her, and she watched him understand it. The running money, the £4 against the night it all went wrong, the readiness of a woman who has learned that safety is a thing you sew into your own clothes, because no one will sew it for you. He did not say anything clumsy. He did not offer her money. She would have left the house before dawn if he had. He was a precise man, and precise men, when they are also good, are very careful with the things they have understood about you. When this is done, he said instead, looking back at the page, and Farah has been made to give you back your father's name, there is a thing I have been meaning to ask you, and I find I would rather ask it now and badly than later and well. He turned the page he was not reading. My uncle's library wants a librarian. It has wanted one for 2 years. The post is real. I will show you the household book. It is the 3rd unfilled post on the list, and it pays. You named a sum that made her go still. And it carries rooms. The good rooms, the south rooms, with the morning light, and a free hand with the catalogue, and no mistress to read to sleep. I have been meaning to fill it for 2 years, and I could not, because I did not know what I wanted in the room, until you walked into it at midnight and told me my Greek was shelved by a man who could not read it. He still did not look at her. His hand was very steady on the page. I am asking whether you would take the post. That is all I am asking. For now. For now. The 2 words sat in the warm air, and did not pretend to be small. Verity Lambourne, who could read 4 languages, and run a household, and dose a fever, and find the lie on any title page in England, discovered that she had no answer ready. None at all. For the first time she could remember. She had spent 3 years making herself need nothing, because need was the thing they used against you. And here was a man, offering her the south rooms with the morning light and a free hand with the catalogue. Offering it as a post and not a gift, so that her pride could survive the taking of it. And offering, underneath it, in 2 words he had set down as carefully as he set down a candle, the rest of his life. "Ask me Friday," she said, when she could speak. "When it is done. Ask me Friday, my lord, and I will give you an answer I have not had to give while I owe you something. I will not say yes to you out of gratitude. You would not want it, and I would not survive it." "No," he agreed gravely. "Gratitude is a poor foundation. I should know. I built half my early life on it." He closed the book, the pages settling with a soft sigh of air. His warm hand brushed hers on the cool leather of the cover, and neither of them moved it away, and the clock had not yet struck, and for once neither of them counted. "Friday, then. We are agreed. After Farrar." "After Farrar," she said. The night before the dinner, the last of the 3, the question written and rewritten until it was a single, clean blade. They did not work the wall at all. There was nothing left to shelve. The Greek stood in its perfect order. Author, then work, then date. The eye travelling left to right through time. And the room had stopped being a problem to be solved and become, without either of them deciding it, a place they simply were. The Duke had brought down a pot of chocolate, and, this once, remembered to drink it while it was hot, the bittersweet steam of it warm in the air between them. Diogenes had claimed the warm spot by the fire, and was making the small grinding purr of a cat who has outlived all his enemies. And Verity sat in the good chair, with her shoes off. She had taken her shoes off, the carpet thick and warm under her stocking feet, in a duke's library, and he had not remarked on it, which was its own kind of intimacy, and read aloud to him, in English, from a book of her own choosing, while he listened with his head back and his eyes closed, and the firelight moving on his unguarded face. "When the lilacs come out," he said, when she paused to turn a leaf. "The ones along the south walk at Stratton. They will be over by the time we are done with Farrar, but next year you should see them. They were my mother's. No one has pruned them properly in 20 years. The gardener is afraid of them. They have got enormous, and they bloom like a riot, and the whole south front smells of them for a fortnight. So sweet you can taste it on the warm air." He paused, and went on more quietly. "You would know how to prune them. You would read it in a book, and then tell the gardener he had been doing it wrong, and he would be furious, and they would bloom twice as well, and you would be insufferable about it." His eyes were still closed. He was smiling. He had spoken the whole of it in the future tense, easily. A man describing a thing he had decided was true. "Next year, you should see them. You would know." "I find," he added, "that I have begun to think of next year as a place that has you in it. I did not used to think of next year at all. It was simply the next column of the ledger." Verity held the book very still in her lap, the cool ribbon of its marker between her fingers. Outside, the low call of an owl, and then the first cart, very far off, its wheels grinding faintly over the cobbles. "You should not say such things," she said. "The night before. It is bad strategy. You told me yourself, leave the feeling on the table, do the work, arrange nothing you cannot afford to lose." But her voice had no firmness in it at all, and she did not lift the book again, and the future he had laid out in the firelit dark sat between them, as real as the chocolate cooling at last in his cup. A quiet morning at a country house, with the lilacs in riot, both of them inside it, the relationship already won, already ordinary, already theirs. "I have arranged nothing," he said. "That is rather the difficulty. For the first time in my well-ordered life, I have arranged nothing at all, and I find I do not want to." I want to see what you do next when I have not arranged it." He opened his eyes and looked at her across the low fire, and Diogenes purred, and the night was so soft and so complete that for one whole minute Verity let herself believe it could simply continue, that the dinner would go as planned, the thief would fall, the post with the south rooms was real, the lilacs would bloom next year, and she would prune them and be insufferable, and the careful woman with 4 pounds in her hem could lay the 4 pounds down at last and stop being ready to run. "Read me the end of it," the Duke said. "The chapter. I want to know how it comes out." She read him the end of the chapter. It came out well. They were both, for that 1 hour before everything, entirely happy, in the unremarkable way of people who have stopped guarding themselves. And that, she would understand later, was exactly what made the next days unsurvivable. Because you cannot lose what you never let yourself have. And she had finally, that night, let herself have it. It was the last easy breath she would draw for a long time, though she did not know it. She went up the back stair that night, light as a girl, and she did not see the figure on the first landing. A maid, only a maid, with a candle of her own, and a grievance Verity had earned without knowing it, weeks ago, by correcting the woman's account of a delivery in front of the housekeeper. A small thing. A companion's small thing. But small things, in a house full of people who count candles, are the seeds of large ones. And the maid had seen, 3 nights running now, a duke and a companion come up from the library at 3 in the morning, and the maid knew exactly what such a thing was worth, told to the right ears, at the right moment, for the right coin. And there was a man in that house who would pay for it. He was coming to dinner on Thursday. Thursday came in soft and bright, a true spring day, the kind that made even London's air taste green. Verity spent it as she spent every day, at Lady Pembroke's elbow, reading the morning's letters aloud, settling the menu, refereeing the old woman's running war with her dresser. And underneath the ordinary day ran a second day, a hidden current, in which she was preparing to face, across a dinner table, the man who had robbed her father in his grave. Twice she had to set down her sewing, because her hands were not her own. "You are wool-gathering," Lady Pembroke observed, sharp over her lorgnette. "You have read me the same paragraph twice, and they were different both times, which means you are inventing it, which means you are thinking of something else." A man? The old woman did not miss as much as people assumed. "It had better not be my nephew. Half the mothers in London have thrown their daughters at that boy, and he has the romantic instincts of a filing cabinet. He will marry some pale heiress chosen for the joining of 2 parks, and he will be perfectly content and never know what he missed, because he has never in his life known what he missed. It is his great failing. Read it again, child, and this time read what is written." Verity read what was written, and said nothing, and thought, "You do not know your nephew at all." And then thought, "But she has known him 30 years, and I have known him 11 nights. And which of us is the fool?" The guests came at 8. Verity, as a companion, had her place, neither servant nor guest, a gentlewoman tolerated at the foot of the table because Lady Pembroke liked her within summoning distance, dressed in her one good gown, the dark green silk she had made herself, turned twice, the fabric cool and slightly worn smooth where her fingers smoothed it again and again under the cloth. She watched Sir Hugh Ferrer come into the Stratton House drawing-room, and she felt the 3 years close up like water. He was handsome. She had forgotten how handsome. The kind of beauty that ages well, silvering at the temples, a fine, straight nose, a mouth made for the graceful delivery of borrowed wisdom. He moved through the room, collecting its admiration as his due, and he was charming to the dowagers, and deferential to the Duke, and witty at exactly the volume that carried. And when he was introduced, in passing, to Lady Pembroke's companion, a Miss Lambourne, his eyes touched her face and slid off it without a flicker, because 3 years ago she had been a frightened girl of 22, in mourning black at the back of a bookseller's, and now she was a thin, pale woman in turned green silk, and men like Sir Hugh Ferrer did not store the faces of women who could not advance them. He did not know her. That was the thing she had not been prepared for. She had carried his name like a coal for 3 years, and to him she was furniture. It almost undid her. It was the Duke who saved her, without seeming to. He caught her eye across the drawing room for the briefest instant. One grave glance that said as plainly as words, "I see you. We are agreed." Friday, and the coal cooled enough to carry, and she went in to dinner on the arm of an elderly clergyman and waited for the trap to spring. It sprang over the second remove. The Duke, who had been quiet through the soup in the way of a man letting others fill a silence he intends to use, set down his glass, the crystal chiming once against the silver, and said, into a lull, "Sir Hugh, I have been reading your Epictetus." The table turned to Ferrer like flowers, candlelight swimming in the glasses, and the warm smell of wax and roast meat thick over the cloth. He inclined his head, modest, practiced. "Your Grace honours a labour of many years." 11, I believe you say in the preface. 11. A man does not hurry Epictetus. No, agreed the Duke. Nor does he hurry a question, and I have one for you, if you will indulge a poor amateur. The passage on what lies within our power and what does not. You render the key term, the famous one, as our own. Some things are our own, and some are not our own. A natural choice. But your great predecessors, and I am told the manuscript tradition is divided here, some render it in our power, which is the more literal, and some up to us, which is the more idiomatic, and the choice between them is the whole philosophy in miniature, is it not? I have always wanted to ask a true scholar, why our own? What did the translator hear in the Greek that made him reach past the literal and the idiomatic both for the word of possession? It was Verity's question. She had written it 3 nights running. It was a question with no fashionable answer, and one true one. And the true one was her father's, recorded in his working notes, which Ferrer had never read, because Ferrer had only stolen the fair copy. That the word turned, in this one place, on a grammatical irregularity, a possessive form her father had spent a fortnight on, the very irregularity of his margin joke. Of marriage and of Greek grammar, only the irregular forms are worth the trouble. A true translator would light up at the question. A thief would have nothing. Sir Hugh Ferrer had nothing. He had, instead, charm, and a great deal of practice, and he spread both over the gap like a man spreading a cloth over a stain. He spoke beautifully for 2 full minutes about the music of the prose, the duty of the translator to the English ear, the false god of the literal. He said the false god of the literal, and Verity, who had heard her father use that exact phrase, felt her skin prickle cold beneath the warm silk, because the thief had even memorized the master's sayings. And he said nothing at all, about the word. And the Duke listened to all of it with the patient, attentive courtesy of a man watching another man dig. Beautifully said, the Duke murmured, when Ferrer finally ran dry. Though you have told me why you did not choose the literal, and I had asked why you chose the possessive. But no matter. It is a small thing. He let it sit, 1 beat. 1 beat exactly. The length of a man deciding to be merciful, which was a lie, because the next door was already open, and he was simply ushering Ferrer through it. It puts me in mind, however. I am endowing an exhibition. The institution, this autumn, English scholarship, the great labours, the manuscripts behind the printed books. I should be honoured beyond words, Sir Hugh, if you would lend us your original. The working pages of the Epictetus in your own hand, the 11 years made visible. There is nothing the public loves so much as the evidence of genius at its labour, the crossings out, the second thoughts. He smiled. Will you lend them to us? And there it was. The room, delighted, turned back to Ferrer, expecting the modest yes a great man gives to a great honour. 20 faces, warm with wine and admiration. And Verity watched the foremost classicist in England understand, in the space of a breath, that he stood in a doorway with a duke's hand on his back, and only one room beyond it. And it was not the room he wanted. He went pale. And then he went charming, which was the same thing in a man like Ferrer. "Your Grace is too kind. The pages, alas, they are in great disorder. A working manuscript is a private thing, a chaos, fit for no eyes but the author's. I should be mortified to—" "The public adores chaos," said the Duke gently. "It reassures them that genius sweats. Come, you cannot deny the nation the sight of how it was done. I will send my own man for them Monday." "They are not in town," Ferrer said. Too fast, a half-second too fast, and Verity saw 3 of the cleverer guests register it. A baronet who did not know where his own life's work was kept. "Then we shall wait upon their return," said the Duke, immovable, pleasant, a wall with a smile painted on it. "There is no hurry. The autumn is months off. You have only to name the day they may be seen." And Sir Hugh Ferrer, cornered before 20 witnesses, with no third door, did the thing that cornered clever men do. He smiled, and he bowed, and he said, of course, Your Grace. I shall consult my man of business and write to you." And he changed the subject with enormous grace to the new Sophocles, and the dinner flowed on. And to 19 of the 20 people at the table, nothing whatever had happened. But Verity had seen his hand on the stem of his wineglass. She had seen the knuckles go white against the cool glass, and then, deliberately, ease. And she knew, the way she knew everything, from the small physical fact, that they had frightened him, exactly as the Duke had promised, and that a frightened thief moves his treasure, and that somewhere in London, tonight or tomorrow, Sir Hugh Ferrer would go to wherever he kept her father's pages, to be sure they were safe, to move them deeper, and that the Duke had men who would know when he did. What none of them had reckoned on, not the Duke with his strategy, not Verity with her father's pages, not Ferrer with his fright, was the maid on the first landing, and the small grievance, and the 3 nights running, and the fact that a frightened man, that very night, having understood that the Duke of Stratton had taken an unaccountable interest in a translation no one had questioned for 3 years, went looking for the reason. And the reason, it transpired, could be bought below stairs for 2 guineas, and the promise of a character. The story reached Verity the way the worst stories always do, sideways, second-hand, already grown. It was Saturday. The trap had been sprung Thursday. Friday she had floated through, waiting for the Duke to find her and ask his question and be answered. And he had not come, and she had told herself he was occupied with the men he had set on Ferrer's trail, and she had been right, he was. But he had also, she would learn, spent Friday in a fury so cold it frightened his secretary. Because Friday morning, the first whisper had reached him, and by Friday night it was in 3 drawing rooms, and by Saturday it was everywhere. And it was this: that the Duke of Stratton, who had never looked twice at a respectable woman in his life, had been keeping his aunt's penniless companion in his library every night for a fortnight. That a maid had seen them, 3 in the morning, hand in hand over a book. That the companion, a scholar's brat, no family, no money, ink on her hands, had set her cap at a duke and very nearly carried it off, the sly thing, the climber, until the talk caught up with her. That Lady Pembroke was mortified. That the girl would be turned off, of course. What else could be done? You could not keep a companion who crept down to gentlemen at midnight. It did not matter what they were doing. It mattered only what it looked like. And what it looked like was the oldest story in the world. Sir Hugh Ferrer had spread it himself, with exquisite regret, to exactly the people who would carry it furthest. He had not invented a word of it. That was the cruelty. Every fact was true. She had been in the library every night. They had been hand to hand over a book. It needed no lie. It needed only to be told by a man who knew that the truth, stripped of its reasons and dressed in a leer, is the most effective lie there is. Lady Pembroke summoned her Saturday afternoon. The old woman was not cruel about it. That was almost the worst part. She was tired and old and embarrassed, and she had a name to protect, and 20 years of position to lose, and a companion who, whatever the truth of it, had made her household the talk of the season. "I do not believe the half of it," she said, not looking at Verity, looking at the fire. "I believe none of the worst of it. You are not a fool, and you are not that kind of fool. But it does not signify what I believe, child. It signifies what is said. I cannot keep you. You must see that I cannot keep you. I will give you your character, a good one, an honest one, you have earned it, and a quarter's wages, and the name of a woman in Bath who wants a companion, and does not read the London papers. You will be gone by Monday. It is the kindest thing I can do, and I am sorry it is not kinder." "I understand," Verity said. She did understand. She had always understood. This was the thing she had sewn 4 pounds into her hem against. This was the night it all went wrong. Arrived at last, exactly as she had always known it would. Because a woman without a name lives one whisper from the cold, and she had let herself forget it for 11 nights in a warm library. And this was the bill. She did not weep. She had learned not to weep where it could be seen. She packed her trunk in the narrow east wing room, the air there cold and close, smelling of damp plaster and a fire too small to warm it, folding the cool slither of the turned green silk she would never wear again into the place where someone with a future kept their hopes. And she unpicked her hem and counted her 4 pounds and her quarter's wages, and found that it came, all told, to enough for the coach to Bath and a fortnight's lodging, and not 1 day more. And she believed. This was the thing. This was the dark night. This was the lie she walked all the way into and stood inside. She believed that the Duke had let it happen. For he had not come. That was the fact her tired mind built the whole black edifice on. 2 days, and he had not come. He had stood in his own drawing room and watched the story start, and he had men everywhere and knew everything an hour after it happened. And he had not sent her 1 word, not 1 line, not one of the small, precise gestures by which she had learned to read him. And she built it, alone, in the cold room, the way you build the worst reading of a silence. He had got what he wanted. He had had his sport with Farah. The trap was sprung. The pages would surface or they would not. But the Duke had his answer and his amusement, and his 11 nights of a clever woman talking to his books. And now the clever woman was inconvenient. And a Duke does not defend a companion against a scandal. A Duke lets the companion be swept out with the morning ash and chooses, as his aunt had said, a pale heiress for the joining of 2 parks. He had wanted a curiosity for his shelves. He had never wanted a wife. The post with the south rooms had been real, perhaps, in some abstract, orderly way, a thing he meant on a Tuesday and forgot by Friday when it grew teeth. He had let the world name her a climber and a thief's daughter and worse, and he had not lifted his steady left hand to stop it, because she had cost him nothing to gain, and would cost him a great deal to keep. And the Duke of Stratton was a man who balanced his accounts to the farthing. She believed it Saturday night. She believed it Sunday in church, where she sat at the back and felt the whispers move along the pews. She believed it Sunday afternoon, packing the last of the books she had not been able to sell. 3 of her father's, the 3 she would have starved before parting with. And she believed it so completely that when the knock came at the east wing door at dusk on Sunday, she very nearly did not open it, because she could not bear to be dismissed twice. It was not the Duke, it was his secretary, a thin, anxious young man named Pell, and he was out of breath, and he held out a letter and a small wrapped parcel and said, "His Grace begs, that is, he could not come himself, Miss Lambourne. He has not slept. He has been at... He said you would not believe a letter. He said you would think... But he made me swear to put these in your hand, and to tell you that he is not at his clubs, and he is not choosing a heiress, whatever you have heard. He said you would think exactly that. He said, tell her I know what she will think, and she is wrong." The young man ran out of air. "He is at Sir Hugh Ferrers' house, miss. He has been there since this morning. He will not leave it without the pages. He said, tell her Friday is only late, not cancelled." Verity took the letter, the paper crisp and cold from the evening air outside. Her hands were not steady. She did not open it. She could not. Not yet. She unwrapped the parcel first, the brown paper rustling and tearing under her fingers, because a parcel was a fact, and a letter was a feeling, and she had learned to trust facts. Inside the parcel were pages, old pages, soft and furred at the worn edges, foxed brown, covered close in a hand she would have known in the dark, by touch, because she had corrected 11 years of it. Her father's hand. The working manuscript of the discourses, the real one, the stolen one. Not all of it, a single gathering, perhaps 30 leaves, the gathering that held the famous passage on what is in our power. And there, in the margin, beside it, in faded brown ink, in Edmund Lambourne's beautiful irregular Greek, the joke. Of marriage and of Greek grammar, only the irregular forms are worth the trouble. She sat down on the cold, bare boards of the East Wing room with her father's hand in her lap, the dry old paper rustling against her skirts, and she made, at last, the sound she had not made in 3 years. The letter, when she could read it, was very short, because the Duke was a precise man and had said the largest thing he had ever said in the fewest words he could find. Miss Lambourne, I went to him Friday at first light, before the talk, to ask my questions civilly, and offer him a civil road out, for your sake, that there be no scandal touching you. He chose the other road. He chose to ruin you before I could prove him, thinking a ruined witness has no voice. He was wrong about the world, and wrong about me. I have been in his house since, and I am not leaving it, and I am sending you the first gathering as proof that I am where I say I am, and doing what I said I would do. I could not come, because if I leave, he will have time to think. Forgive the letter. I know what you will think of my silence. You think it always, of everyone, because everyone has earned it of you except, I hope, beginning now, me. The post is real. Friday is only late. Sit by your fire, and do not pack. S. She did not pack. She sat by her fire, with her father's hand in her lap, and she did not pack, and she waited. And for the first time in 3 years, she let herself want a thing in the daylight, where it could be taken from her, which is the bravest thing a careful person ever does. The Duke came Monday, in the morning, in the good light. He came up the front stair, not the back, in full view of the household, and his mortified aunt, and the maid who had sold him for 2 guineas. And he asked for Miss Lambourne in the morning room, formally, before witnesses, which Verity understood was deliberate, because a man who has compromised a woman's name in private repairs it in public, or not at all. She came down in the turned green silk. The morning room was full of clean spring light, cool and sharp after the close east wing, smelling faintly of beeswax and last night's cold ash in the grate. He had not slept. She could see it. He was grey with it, and his cravat was a day old and crushed, and his hand, when he set the portfolio down on the morning room table with a soft, leathern thud, was, for the first time since she had known him, not quite steady. I have the rest, he said. He laid his palm flat on the cool leather, the broad left hand she had taught to read. All of it. 11 years of your father's hand. I have it because Sir Hugh Ferrer gave it to me, of his own will, with his own hand, an hour ago. And you will want to know how, because you do not believe in things you have not seen. And you are right not to. So I have brought him to tell you himself. He is in the hall. He is going to come into this room and put the pages into your hand and say a thing he wrote and signed at 4 o'clock this morning. And then he is going to go and never trouble your father's name again. May I bring him in? Verity could not speak. She nodded. The Duke of Stratton went to the door and opened it, and Sir Hugh Ferrer came into the morning room. He was not handsome now. A frightened man at 4 in the morning who has lost everything is never handsome, and this one had the grey, unmade look of a building after a fire, the charm all burned off it, only the structure left, and the structure was small. He carried a portfolio of his own, the worn leather creaking in his grip. and a single folded sheet that trembled with the shaking of his hand. And he would not look at the Duke, and he could not look at Verity. And into the silence the Duke said, very quietly, "Sir Hugh, the lady is waiting." Ferrer crossed the room, his shoes loud and uneven on the bare polished boards. He was made to cross it. Verity understood that the Duke had arranged even this, that she should not go to the thief, but the thief come to her, on her ground, in her light. He set the portfolio on the table within her reach, the leather scraping the wood. His hands shook worse than hers ever had. "These are the original pages," he said. His beautiful voice had a crack in it now. Of the translation of the Discourses of Epictetus. They are in the hand of Mr. Edmund Lambourne. The work is his. The 11 years were his. I had of him, 11 years ago, a fair copy lent in trust, and when he was gone, and could not, I published it as my own. I have grown rich and celebrated on it. It is the only true thing I ever did, and I did not do it. I only signed it. He unfolded the single sheet. His voice, when he read from it, was the flattest sound in the world. I, Hugh Ferrer, Baronet, do acknowledge that the translation published under my name in the spring of is wholly and entirely the work of the late Edmund Lambourne, and that I had no part in it save the theft of his name. I withdraw all claim. I restore his name to his work. This is written freely, in my own hand, and witnessed. He set the confession on top of the pages. He could not look at her. "I am sorry," he said, and it was not enough, and they both knew it, and he said it anyway, which was, Verity thought, the first honest thing she had ever heard him say. "Your father was the better man, and the better scholar, and I knew it every day for 11 years. Verity reached out and took up the confession, the single sheet cool and faintly damp at the fold from his grip. She read it through. The Duke had been right. She would believe nothing she had not seen with her own eyes. And she read it twice, and it said what he had said it said, in his own hand, the ink still glossy and new, signed, witnessed by the Duke and by the anxious Secretary Pell. And beneath it lay her father's pages, all of them, soft and worn under her fingers, 11 years made visible, the crossings out, the second thoughts, the margin jokes, the whole living mind of the man who had taught her letters in 2 alphabets at once. She did not forgive Sir Hugh Ferrer. She would not insult her father's grave with so cheap a grace. But she found, holding the pages, that the coal she had carried for 3 years had finally gone out, not because the thief had repented, but because the theft was undone. And the difference between those two things was the difference between mercy and justice, and she had only ever wanted the second. "You may go," she said. It was all she said to him. He went. When the door had closed with the soft click of its iron latch, the morning room was very quiet and very bright, and the Duke of Stratton stood across the table from her, with his sleepless grey face and his day-old cravat, and his warm hand flat on the cool old paper of her father's pages. And neither of them counted the clock, because there was no clock, only the spring light coming bright through the long windows, and the two of them, and 11 years between them, on the table. "How?" she said. "He would never have signed that. A confession ends him. A fumbled question at dinner he could laugh off. How did you make him write his own ruin at 4 in the morning?" "I did not make him," the Duke said. "I gave him a choice, the way one does. I told you, leave a man one door." He turned the pages a precise quarter so they faced her, the old leaves whispering against one another. Hers now, only hers. "I went to his house Friday, and I did not threaten him. I sat down, and I told him that I knew, that I had the proof of the margin from your memory, and would have the pages by force of law if I had to spend a decade and a fortune on it, and that a decade and a fortune are nothing to me, and the rest of his life to him. He laid one finger on the topmost sheet. "And I told him that there were two roads. And the first, he fought me, and lost, slowly and publicly over years, and ended a proven forger, with his name struck from every society, a thing schoolboys would laugh at in 100 years. On the second, he gave the pages back, now, tonight, and signed the confession. And I," the Duke's mouth twisted, "I undertook to keep that confession private, in my own strongbox, unpublished, on the single condition that he withdraw from public scholarship within the year, and never speak your father's name or yours again." He looked at her steadily. "The world will be told only that Sir Hugh Ferrer, in failing health, has retired to the country, and generously restored a manuscript to the family of a fellow scholar. He keeps his liberty and the rags of his name. Your father gets his work and his name back, on the title page of my exhibition, in letters a foot high. And you—" He stopped. "And I?" Verity said. "And you get the choice," the Duke said, "that I promised you. Friday's choice. Late, but not cancelled." He took his hand off the pages. He stood up very straight, the most precise man in England, and she saw that he had thought about this, that he had arranged the words the way he arranged everything, and that for once the arrangement was costing him visibly, because there was no system in the world for the thing he was about to do, and he was doing it anyway, in a daylight, without one. "I have ruined your name, Miss Lambourne. Not by intending to, by being careless of a thing I did not know was fragile, which is its own crime. The whole of London says you crept down to me at midnight. The whole of London is right, you did. I waited for you each night with 2 lamps lit and cold chocolate I forgot to drink, and it was the only hour of my well-ordered life in which anything was ever out of place, and I would not give back 1 minute of it to be respectable." He drew a breath, and she watched the careful man choose, deliberately, not to be careful. "I can repair your name one way only, and it is not a way I have any right to ask after costing you so much, so I am not asking it as repair. I am asking it because I went to a forger's house and sat there 3 nights without sleeping, and the thing that kept me in the chair was not justice. It was that I could not bear for you to go to Bath believing I had let you fall. Marry me, not to mend the scandal. The scandal I will mend regardless. You have my word and my aunt's, who is at this moment composing the most crushing letters of her life." His voice, which never moved, moved. "Marry me because I have 10,000 books, and only learned to read the half of them when you walked in. And I would very much like, to be read the rest of my life by the one person who ever looked at me and saw the gap on the 3rd shelf." The clock in the hall, 2 floors below, began to strike. Verity heard it through the floors, very faint. She did not count it. "You are asking badly," she said. Her voice was not steady, and she did not try to make it steady, here in the daylight, where it could be seen. "You said you would rather ask badly and now than well and later, on the 2nd night, do you remember, over the Plato? You have remembered to ask badly. You have forgotten only one thing." "Name it," instantly, a man requiring a fact. "You have not asked me whether I would have you. You have told me why you want me, which was very fine, and you have offered to mend my name, which was very good, and you have arranged everything, which is the most you of anything you have ever done. But you have not stood in this room and asked me the question, and waited for my answer without arranging it first." She came around the table, her green skirts whispering against its edge. She was close to him now, close enough to see that the grey of his face was 3 days without sleep on her account, close enough to smell the cold night air and old leather still on his coat, close enough to take his left hand, the broad, warm left hand she had taught to read Greek, and turn it palm up between her own. "Ask me, and then be silent, my lord, which I know is the hardest thing in the world for a man who likes to know where everything is before he reaches for it. And let me answer in my own time." The Duke of Stratton looked at his own palm in her hands, And then he did the bravest thing she ever saw him do. Braver than the 3 nights in the forger's house. He let go of the arrangement. He stopped knowing the answer. He stood in his aunt's morning room with the spring light on him and his life entirely out of order. And he said, simply, with nothing arranged around it to break his fall, "Verity, will you marry me?" And then, she would love him for this until she was old. He was silent. He waited. He who could not bear a gap on a shelf, who answered his letters the day they came, who had never in his life left a question unresolved a moment longer than he had to, stood and waited in the longest silence he had ever permitted, and let her take her own time, because she had asked him to. She took her time. She traced with one finger on the warm skin of his upturned palm, slowly, the way he had learned to read, a single letter. Not Greek. An English yes, drawn on his hand so that the muscle and not only the ear would learn it, so that he would carry the shape of her answer in the hand that turned every page for the rest of his life. "Yes," she said aloud, when she had finished drawing it. "Read it back to me, my lord. You know your letters now. I taught you myself." He read it back. His voice broke entirely on the single word, the precise voice gone all to pieces, and he pulled her in by the hand she had written on, and the 11 years of her father's pages lay witnessing on the table, and the spring light came in through the long windows of Stratton House, and somewhere below them, a clock finished striking an hour neither of them would ever be able to name, because for the first and last time in the Duke of Stratton's well-ordered life, he had entirely lost count. They were married in the summer, quietly, from the house of his aunt, who had indeed composed the most crushing letters of her life and delivered several of them in person, and who took full and permanent credit for the match on the grounds that she had brought the girl into the house, and whom no one, least of all Verity, troubled to correct. Sir Hugh Ferrer retired to the country in failing health, and was not much missed. And in the autumn, the institution opened its exhibition of English scholarship. The great labours made visible, the manuscripts behind the printed books, and in the place of honour, in a case all its own, lay 11 years of a poor man's hand, open to a page with a joke in the margin, beneath a card that read, in letters a foot high, "The Discourses of Epictetus, translated by Edmund Lambourne, restored to its author." But that is the public end of the story, and Verity had never cared much for the public end of anything. The private end was this. A morning, the following spring, a true spring morning, the kind that makes even London taste green, the windows of the great library standing open to it for the first time in years. Verity Carrick, Duchess of Stratton and librarian of Stratton House, a post she had insisted on keeping after the wedding, to the scandal and delight of everyone, stood at the 3rd shelf, second from the window, with a book in her hands. It was a new book, fresh from the binder, calf and gilt, the leather still stiff and sweet-smelling, and faintly tacky under her thumb. And it was hers. Her own translation. Her father's notes completed in her father's daughter's hand. The work they had begun together when she was 12, and corrected his fair copies. Finished now, and printed under the name of Lambourne, which was once again a name that meant something in the small world that cared about such things. Her hands were warm. She noticed it, because she noticed everything. The small physical facts. That the hands which had gripped a stolen book by a single guttering candle at midnight, cold to the bone, 3 years and a whole life ago, were warm now in the morning light, shelving her own work where it belonged. She set the book in the gap she had left for it, the spine sliding home with a soft, satisfying creak. 3rd shelf, second from the window, where the Greek was now in perfect order, by author, then by work, then by date. So the eye travelled left to right through time, and a man with a memory that lost nothing could find anything he reached for. She felt him in the doorway before she heard him. She always did. "You have left a gap," said the Duke of Stratton, coming in with his coat off and his sleeves turned back, and the look he wore only in this room. "A half-inch too wide. 2nd shelf. You took down the Seneca and did not put it back." "I put it back," Verity said, not turning, smiling at the spines. In better order than you keep it. You put it back, he said, close behind her now, his hand coming to rest on the warm small of her back, his chin at her hair, both of them looking at the wall of books that had brought them together, and the new book that was hers among them. Exactly where it lives. He reached past her and drew it out, her book, her father's work and hers, and held it in the broad left hand she had taught to read, and opened it, the new spine cracking softly for the first time, and read, slowly, easily, aloud, the first line of the Greek she had set down, while the spring came in, warm and green-smelling at the open windows, and stirred the pages under his hand. She rested her hand over his on the page, and let herself be read.